There are people who wake up every single day surrounded by countless blessings, yet their eyes search only for what is missing. They walk through gardens of mercy but complain about a single thorn. They breathe without effort, they see, they hear, they are provided for in ways they cannot even count, yet their tongues remain heavy with complaints. And the question we must ask ourselves is simple but powerful. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why is it that when 10 things go right and one thing goes wrong, our hearts cling to that one difficulty as though it defines our entire existence? Why do we allow a moment of discomfort to erase a lifetime of ease? This is not just a habit, it is a way of thinking that slowly distances us from recognizing the beauty that surrounds us every single day. There is something within the human being that naturally drifts toward what is missing rather than what is present. It is almost as though the mind is wired to scan for gaps, for imperfections, for things that are not yet fulfilled. You can give a person comfort, stability, and ease, and yet their attention will quietly slip toward that one area of life where something feels incomplete. This tendency is subtle, but it is powerful, and if left unchecked, it begins to shape the way a person sees everything around them. A person may be blessed with health, but they focus on a minor discomfort. They may be surrounded by people who care for them, yet they dwell on the one relationship that did not work out. They may have enough to live, to eat, to survive with dignity, yet their thoughts revolve around what others have that they do not. And over time, this focus becomes a habit, and that habit becomes a mindset, and that mindset becomes a lens through which they view their entire life. What is important to understand is that this is not always intentional. Many people do not wake up choosing to be ungrateful or negative. It happens quietly. The heart becomes accustomed to noticing absence instead of presence. The mind becomes trained to highlight problems instead of blessings. And when this continues long enough, a person can be surrounded by goodness and still feel as though they have nothing. Part of this comes from comparison. We live in a world where it is easier than ever to see what others have. You look around and you see people who seem happier, more successful, more fulfilled. And instead of appreciating your own journey, your mind begins to measure your life against theirs. You start to feel as though you are behind, as though you are lacking, as though what you have is not enough. And in that moment, the blessings in your own hands begin to feel smaller, not because they are small, but because you are looking at something else. Another part of this tendency comes from forgetfulness. Human beings forget very quickly. There were moments in your life when you raised your hands and asked desperately for something. You felt a deep need, a sense of urgency, a longing in your heart. And when that need was fulfilled, there was relief, there was happiness, there was gratitude. But as time passed, that feeling faded. What was once a blessing became normal. What was once a dream became routine. And when something becomes routine, we stop noticing it. This is how a person can move from gratitude to complaint without even realizing it. They are no longer amazed by what they have because they have grown used to it. The extraordinary becomes ordinary, and once it becomes ordinary, it is no longer appreciated in the same way. And so the heart begins to search again, not for what it already holds, but for what it thinks it is missing. There is also a deeper element tied to expectations. When a person builds an image in their mind of how life should be, anything that falls short of that image feels like a problem. Even if their reality is filled with goodness, it does not feel sufficient because it does not match the picture they created. And so instead of seeing blessings, they see flaws. Instead of feeling contentment, they feel dissatisfaction. This way of thinking slowly drains a person's peace. Because no matter how much they receive, it will never feel like enough if their focus remains on what is absent. There will always be something more, something different, something they wish they had. And if the heart is constantly chasing what it does not have, it will never fully embrace what it already does. What is truly remarkable is that two people can live very similar lives, yet experience them completely differently. One may look at their life and see countless reasons to be thankful, while the other sees countless reasons to complain. The difference is not in what they possess, but in what they choose to notice. One trains their heart to recognize blessings, while the other allows their mind to fixate on gaps. And this is where awareness becomes so important, because once a person realizes this tendency within themselves, they can begin to challenge it. They can pause when a complaint rises and ask themselves, what am I overlooking right now? What have I been given that I have stopped appreciating? They can remind themselves that what feels ordinary today was once something they hoped for, something they longed for, something they would have been grateful for beyond words. When a person begins to shift their focus even slightly, it changes the way they experience life. The same situation can feel lighter, the same circumstances can feel more meaningful simply because the heart is now looking at what is present instead of what is missing. And slowly, that habit of noticing blessings begins to grow, replacing the old habit of focusing on absence until the heart starts to feel a sense of richness, not because everything is perfect, but because it is finally seeing what was always there. There is a quiet danger in constant complaining, and it is not always visible on the surface. A person may think they are simply expressing frustration, simply reacting to the difficulties of life, but over time, those repeated words begin to shape the state of the heart. Complaining is not just something that comes out of the tongue. It is something that settles deep within, gradually influencing how a person sees everything around them. When a person complains frequently, their attention becomes fixed on what is wrong. Even when something good happens, it struggles to hold their focus for long. The mind quickly moves past it and returns to what is lacking, what is uncomfortable, what is not going according to plan. This repeated pattern slowly trains the heart to overlook blessings, not because they are absent, but because they are no longer being noticed. It is like standing in a room filled with light, but choosing to focus only on a small shadow in the corner. The more you stare at that shadow, the larger it appears, until eventually it feels as though the entire room is dark. In reality, the light has not disappeared, but your perception has shifted so strongly that you can no longer appreciate it. Complaining works in a very similar way. It magnifies problems and minimizes blessings until the balance is completely distorted. Over time, this way of thinking becomes automatic. A person no longer needs to search for something to complain about. It comes naturally. Even in moments of ease, the heart feels unsettled, almost as if it is searching for an issue to focus on. And when this becomes the default state, gratitude begins to fade. Not because there is nothing to be grateful for, but because the heart has become conditioned to ignore it. There is also an emotional weight that comes with constant complaining. Every complaint reinforces a sense of dissatisfaction. It reminds the person of what they believe is missing, and each reminder adds a small burden to the heart. These burdens accumulate, and before long, the person feels overwhelmed, even if their circumstances have not significantly changed. The heaviness they feel is not always from their situation, but from the way they are processing it. What makes this even more difficult is that complaining often feels justified. A person may say, "But I have real problems, real struggles, real difficulties," and that is true. Life is not free from hardship. Everyone faces moments of pain, uncertainty, and challenge. But there is a difference between acknowledging difficulty and becoming consumed by it. One allows you to grow, while the other keeps you stuck. When complaining becomes excessive, it begins to close the door to reflection. Instead of asking, "What can I learn from this?" or "What is still good in my life despite this challenge?" the mind remains focused on the problem itself. It circles around it repeatedly without seeking meaning or balance. And as a result, the person loses the ability to see the hidden blessings that often exist alongside hardship. Even more subtly, constant complaining affects the way a person connects with everything around them. They may begin to feel distant from moments of joy, unable to fully experience them because their mind is already anticipating the next problem. They may struggle to feel content even when things are going well because they have become so used to focusing on what is wrong that peace feels unfamiliar. There is also an impact on relationships. When a person constantly complains, it changes the energy they bring into their interactions. Others may feel drained, not because they lack compassion, but because the negativity becomes overwhelming. And in this way, complaining does not just affect the individual, it begins to shape their environment as well. What is important to realize is that the heart can only hold so much focus at one time. If it is filled with complaints, there is very little room left for gratitude. If it is constantly pointing out flaws, it will struggle to recognize beauty. And if it is always dwelling on what is missing, it will forget to appreciate what is present. Breaking this pattern begins with awareness. It requires a person to notice how often they complain, to recognize the patterns in their thoughts and words. It requires a conscious effort to pause and redirect that focus, even when it feels difficult. Because at first it will feel unnatural. The mind is used to one way of thinking, and changing it takes time. But as a person begins to reduce their complaints, even slightly, something starts to shift. They begin to notice things they previously overlooked. Small moments of ease, simple blessings, everyday comforts that once went unappreciated start to stand out. And with each moment of awareness, the heart begins to soften, becoming more open to gratitude. This does not mean a person will never feel frustration or difficulty again. Those emotions are part of being human. But instead of allowing them to dominate their perspective, they begin to hold them in balance. They learn to acknowledge challenges without losing sight of blessings. They learn to experience hardship without becoming blind to mercy. And in doing so, they protect their heart from becoming overwhelmed by negativity, allowing it to remain connected to the countless blessings that exist in every moment. There is a deep and often overlooked consequence of ingratitude that goes far beyond a simple lack of appreciation. It begins quietly, almost unnoticeably, but over time it settles into the heart and reshapes a person's inner world. When someone constantly overlooks what they have been given, when they dismiss blessings as insignificant or expected, something within them begins to harden. The heart that was once capable of feeling contentment starts to lose that ability, and what remains is a restless dissatisfaction that no amount of worldly gain seems to satisfy. Ingratitude affects the way a person feels before it affects what they have. A person may possess comfort, stability, even moments of joy, but if their heart is not trained to recognize and value these things, they will feel as though they are living without enough. It creates a gap between reality and perception, where the life a person is living may be full, but their experience of it feels empty. And this emptiness is not caused by a lack of blessings, but by a lack of acknowledgement. Emotionally, ingratitude feeds anxiety and frustration. When a person is constantly focused on what is missing, they live in a state of anticipation, always waiting for something else to complete them. There is always another goal, another desire, another expectation that must be fulfilled before they can finally feel at peace. But that moment never truly arrives because the habit of overlooking blessings continues even after those desires are met. What was once longed for becomes ordinary, and the heart moves on to the next thing, leaving behind a trail of unappreciated gifts. This cycle creates a kind of emotional exhaustion. A person keeps striving, keeps chasing, keeps hoping that the next achievement or possession will bring satisfaction, but the satisfaction is always temporary. It fades quickly because it is not rooted in gratitude. And so the person feels tired, not just physically, but internally, as though they are running without ever reaching a place of rest. They may even begin to question why they feel this way, not realizing that the answer lies in the way they have been perceiving their blessings all along. Spiritually, the damage runs even deeper. Ingratitude creates a barrier between the heart and its sense of connection to the one who provides. When a person fails to recognize blessings, they begin to lose sight of where those blessings come from. They may still believe, they may still practice outwardly, but the sweetness of that connection starts to fade. Worship can begin to feel routine rather than meaningful because the heart is no longer filled with the awareness of how much it has been given. A grateful heart, on the other hand, is alive. It feels a sense of closeness, a sense of appreciation that turns even the simplest acts into something meaningful. But when ingratitude takes over, that awareness diminishes. The person becomes more focused on their complaints than on their connection, more aware of their problems than of the countless ways they are being cared for. And in that state, the soul begins to feel distant, even if the person cannot fully explain why. There is also a subtle arrogance that can grow from ingratitude. When a person stops acknowledging blessings, they may begin to see what they have as something they fully earned or deserved. They may forget the moments of help, the unseen protection, the countless factors beyond their control that contributed to their situation. This mindset shifts the heart from humility to entitlement, where instead of feeling thankful for what is given, the person begins to feel that they are owed even more. This sense of entitlement only deepens dissatisfaction, because when a person believes they deserve more, whatever they have will always feel insufficient. No matter how much they receive, it will not match their expectations, and so the feeling of lack continues to grow. In this way, ingratitude not only prevents contentment, it actively replaces it with a sense of constant deficiency. Another effect of ingratitude is how it shapes a person's outlook on hardship. Difficulties are a part of life, but when a person lacks gratitude, those difficulties can feel overwhelming. Without the ability to recognize blessings alongside struggles, every challenge appears heavier than it truly is. The person loses the balance that allows them to see that even within hardship, there are elements of mercy, lessons, and growth. Over time, this imbalance can lead to a negative outlook on life as a whole. The person may begin to see their life as a series of problems rather than a combination of blessings and tests. They may feel unlucky, burdened, or constantly deprived, even when there is much to appreciate. And this perspective can become so deeply rooted that it feels like reality, even though it is shaped largely by the absence of gratitude. Yet what makes this situation particularly difficult is that the person may not even realize what is happening. Ingratitude does not always announce itself clearly. It can appear as simple complaints, as small moments of dissatisfaction, as passing thoughts of comparison. But when these moments accumulate, they form a pattern, and that pattern begins to define the emotional and spiritual state of the individual. Reversing this requires more than just occasional thankfulness. It requires a deliberate effort to notice, to reflect, to pause, and truly acknowledge what has been given. It requires a shift from taking things for granted to seeing them as gifts, from expecting more to appreciating what is already present. And as this shift begins, even in small ways, the heaviness that once filled the heart starts to lift, replaced by a sense of ease that was always within reach but remained hidden behind the veil of ingratitude. There is a powerful transformation that begins when a person makes the conscious decision to shift their perspective, not by changing their circumstances, but by changing the way they see those circumstances. Life itself may remain the same. The challenges may still exist. The uncertainties may not immediately disappear. But the way the heart experiences all of it begins to change in a profound and lasting way. This shift does not happen automatically. It requires intention, awareness, and a willingness to train the heart to see beyond what is obvious. The heart, much like the mind, can be trained. Just as a person can develop habits of negativity or complaint, they can also develop habits of reflection and gratitude. But this requires effort because the natural tendency often leans toward noticing problems more quickly than blessings. To reverse this, a person must actively remind themselves to pause, to look again, and to search for what is good, even when it is not immediately visible. One of the most important aspects of this shift is learning to slow down. In a fast-paced life, moments pass quickly, and with them pass countless small blessings that go unnoticed. A quiet morning, a moment of ease, a kind word from someone, the ability to rest after a long day, these are things that often slip by without acknowledgement. But when a person slows down and becomes more aware, these moments begin to stand out. They begin to carry meaning, and that meaning feeds the heart with a sense of appreciation. Another part of training the heart is learning to ask different questions. Instead of immediately asking, why is this happening to me? A person can begin to ask, what is still good in this moment? Or what can I learn from this situation? These questions do not deny the existence of difficulty, but they open the door to seeing beyond it. They allow the heart to remain balanced, to recognize that even within challenges, there are elements of mercy that might not be obvious at first glance. It is also important to recognize that blessings are not always in the form we expect. Sometimes what we perceive as a setback carries within it a hidden benefit. A delay may protect a person from something they were not meant to face. A loss may redirect them towards something better. A difficulty may strengthen them in ways that ease never could. But these realities can only be appreciated when the heart is willing to look deeper beyond the surface of the situation. Training the heart to see mercy in every situation does not mean forcing yourself to feel happy all the time. It does not mean ignoring pain or pretending that everything is perfect. Rather, it means allowing yourself to feel what you feel while also maintaining an awareness that there is more to the situation than what you are immediately experiencing. It is about holding both truths at once, that life can be difficult and that it can still be filled with blessings at the same time. Consistency plays a crucial role in this transformation. A single moment of gratitude is beneficial, but it is the repeated practice of it that reshapes the heart. Each time a person chooses to notice a blessing instead of a complaint, they are strengthening a new way of thinking. Each time they reflect on what they have instead of what they lack, they are building a habit that gradually becomes more natural. And over time, this habit begins to replace the old patterns that once dominated their perspective. There is also a sense of humility that develops through this process. When a person becomes more aware of their blessings, they begin to recognize how much of what they have is not purely the result of their own effort. They see the ways in which they have been supported, protected, and provided for, often without even realizing it at the time. This awareness softens the heart, making it more receptive, more appreciative, and more connected to the reality that they are not alone in their journey. As this perspective deepens, it begins to affect how a person responds to others as well. They become more patient, more understanding, less quick to judge. Because when you train your heart to see the good in your own life, you naturally begin to look for the good in others. You become less focused on faults and more aware of the efforts, struggles, and intentions that people carry within them. There is also a noticeable change in emotional stability. A person who trains their heart in this way is not as easily shaken by small setbacks. They still experience disappointment, but it does not consume them. They still face challenges, but those challenges do not define their entire outlook, because their perspective is anchored in something deeper, something more stable than the shifting circumstances of life.